I am Leah Chambers, 17, and literally last night, my role as the family's unseen servant backfired. The life I'd been holding together, cooking, cleaning, keeping their world spinning, it blew up into a full-on family meltdown at our so-called family meeting. My father, the man who ruled our house like a dictator, demanded I keep doing my brother's chores, and when I clapped back, the room went dead silent. "You're nothing without us," he roared, his fist slamming the table, with my mother and brother staring like I'd betrayed them. But here's the tea. Their cruelty didn't break me, it lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to flip the script and change everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit subscribe and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear. Looking back, it's almost, you wouldn't believe what I did once I made that choice. I stood there, the sting of my father's hand still burning my cheek, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. The kitchen table, scratched and wobbly from years of my scrubbing, was the only thing between me and the three of them. My father, red-faced and towering, my mother, eyes down, picking at her chipped nail polish, and my brother, Caleb, smirking like he'd won something. I'd just refused to do his laundry, a chore I'd been forced into since I was 12, and now the air was thick with their judgment. "You think you're too good for this family?" My father spat, his voice low like a warning shot. I didn't answer, not because I was scared though my knees were shaking, but because I was done. Done explaining, done pleading, done being their ghost. For years, I was the one who kept the house running. I was up at 5 a.m. to make breakfast before school, my hands raw from washing dishes they'd leave piled in the sink. I'd iron Caleb's shirts for his important debate club meets while he played video games, his laughter echoing through the walls. My mother would nod absently when I handed her a grocery list, never once asking how I managed to stretch $50 to feed 4 people for a week. My father? He'd bark orders. Fix the leaky faucet, scrub the floors, don't talk back. I was their servant, invisible unless I missed a spot. And yet, they acted like I owed them my soul for the privilege of existing. Last night wasn't the first time my father raised his hand. I was 14 when he first slapped me for sassing him after I asked why Caleb didn't have to help. I remember the way my cheek throbbed, the way my mother turned her head pretending she didn't see. Caleb just laughed, said I deserved it. I learned to keep my mouth shut, to move like a shadow through our small creaking house. But something shifted in me over time. Each chore I did, each insult I swallowed, wasn't breaking me, it was building something. A quiet strength, a plan I didn't even know I was forming until that moment at the table. I stood there, my father's words still hanging in the air, and I felt it. A clarity so sharp it was like a blade. My hands, calloused from years of scrubbing their messes, curled into fists at my sides. I didn't flinch when he leaned closer, his breath hot with anger. "You'll do as you're told, Leah," he said, "or you're out." My mother's eyes flicked up, just for a second, but she said nothing. Caleb's smirk widened like he was waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't. I looked at them, really looked, and saw what they were. A family that only stood because I carried them. Without me, they'd fall. I didn't scream or cry, I didn't beg. I just nodded, slow and deliberate, and said, "Okay." My father blinked, thrown off by my calm. My mother's fingers froze on her nails. Caleb's smirk faltered. They didn't know it yet, but that was the moment I decided to walk away. Not in a blaze of glory, not with a speech they didn't deserve. I was going to leave them with something worse. The truth. A truth I'd been carving into existence for years, one they'd never see coming. As I turned to walk to my room, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum, I felt the weight of it. The ledger, the box, the plan. They thought they'd broken me, but they'd trained me. And tonight, I'd use everything they taught me to bring their world down. I slipped into my room, the one place in the house that felt like mine, though even that was a lie. The walls were bare, the mattress thin, the single bulb flickering above. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling not from fear but from purpose. I reached under the bed frame, my fingers brushing the shoebox I'd hidden there. Inside was the ledger, pages and pages of my life, reduced to lists and numbers. Every chore, every hour, every sacrifice I'd made for them. It was my secret, my rebellion, my proof. I didn't know then that it would be my weapon, but I knew it mattered. As I held it, I felt the spark from the table flare into something bigger, a fire that would burn their house of cards to the ground. The shoebox sat heavy in my lap, the ledger inside it a ticking bomb I hadn't yet decided to detonate. I ran my fingers over its worn edges, the cardboard soft from years of handling, and let my mind slip back to the moments that built it. My family's dismissal of me wasn't loud or dramatic most days. It was a quiet, grinding thing, like sandpaper on my soul. They didn't see me, not really, but I saw them. I saw every time they celebrated Caleb's mediocre achievements while my endless labor went unnoticed, like I was just part of the furniture. I was 13 when I first felt the weight of their indifference. It was Caleb's middle school graduation, a ceremony I'd helped him prepare for, ironing his button-up, packing his lunch, even quizzing him on his speech while he rolled his eyes. The auditorium was packed, the air thick with proud parents snapping photos. My father clapped Caleb on the back, booming, "That's my boy!" as Caleb grinned under the spotlight. My mother dabbed her eyes, clutching a program I'd stayed up late printing for her. I sat in the back row, my hands folded, still smelling like the bleach I'd used to scrub the kitchen floor that morning. Nobody mentioned me, not a thank you, not a glance. When we got home, my father handed Caleb $50 for his big day. I got a grunt and a, "Make dinner quick, Leah." Another memory, sharper, from when I was 15. I'd won a writing contest at school, my essay about resilience pinned to the community board downtown. I was so proud I could barely breathe, clutching the certificate as I walked home, imagining my parents' faces when I showed them. I set it on the kitchen table, right next to the pot roast I'd spent hours slow cooking. My mother glanced at it, her lips pursing like she'd tasted something sour. "That's nice, Leah," she said, then turned to Caleb. "Tell me more about your soccer tryouts." My father didn't even look up from his plate. Caleb snorted, shoving the certificate aside to grab the salt. "Who cares about some dumb essay?" he said. I swallowed the lump in my throat, picked up the certificate, and tucked it into my drawer. That night, I started the ledger. Just a notebook then, hidden under my mattress, where I scribbled, October 12, cooked dinner, 3 hour, washed dishes, 1 hour. No one noticed. The ledger grew over the years, a silent record of my invisibility. Every task, every chore, every moment I spent keeping their lives together while they praised Caleb for things I could have done blindfolded. Like the time he got a B on a math test, and my father hung it on the fridge like it was a masterpiece. I'd been tutoring him, staying up past midnight to explain fractions, but nobody hung my straight-A report card anywhere. Or the time my mother bragged to her book club about Caleb's leadership in debate club, while I was the one organizing their schedules, paying bills with her debit card, and making sure the lights stayed on. My hands would shake as I wrote in the ledger, March 3, balanced budget, 2 hours, grocery shopped, 1.5 hours, Caleb got a new phone case for trying hard. It wasn't just the big moments, it was the small ones, too. The way my father's eyes skipped over me when he walked in, the way my mother's voice softened for Caleb but sharpened for me. "Leah, the laundry's piling up," she'd say, while Caleb sprawled on the couch, his socks on the floor I'd just swept. I'd nod, my jaw tight, and add it to the ledger. July 19, laundry, 2 hours, picked up Caleb's mess, 30 minutes. The pages filled up, a map of my erasure, each entry a tiny act of defiance. I wasn't just keeping track, I was proving I existed. Last night, as I sat in my room after the family meeting, the ledger felt heavier than ever. I opened it, flipping through years of entries, my handwriting growing neater, angrier with time. January 14, fixed leaky sink, 1 hour. Father yelled for not doing it fast enough. April 22, cooked Easter dinner, 4 hours. Mother said it was dry. June 10, cleaned entire house for Caleb's party, 5 hours. Nobody said thank you. I traced the words, my finger smudging the ink. They thought I was nothing. But these pages told a different story. I was the one who kept the house standing, the one who carried their weight. And now, I was done carrying. I closed the ledger, my heart steady now, the spark from the table blazing into resolve. They didn't know it, but they'd taught me how to survive them. Every chore, every ignored effort, had sharpened me into someone stronger than they could ever imagine. I slid the ledger back into the shoebox, my hands no longer trembling. I wasn't just going to walk away, I was going to leave them with the truth, a truth that would unravel everything they thought they were. As I stood, my shadow stretched across the bare walls, and for the first time, I felt solid, real, unbreakable. The shoebox sat on my lap, its weight anchoring me as I opened it, the ledger's pages crinkling under my fingers. It wasn't just a notebook anymore, it was my rebellion, my proof, my secret weapon. I'd started it out of hurt, a way to scream into the void when no one listened, but it became something more. A mirror showing me who I was when they refused to see. The moment I realized its power came a year ago, a quiet night that changed everything, when I understood that my family's neglect hadn't broken me. It had built me. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots after another dinner where Caleb got the praise for showing up while I'd spent hours cooking. My hands were raw, the sponge worn thin, and my eyes burned from exhaustion. I was 16, drowning in schoolwork and their endless demands, and I'd just overheard my father tell my mother, "Leah's fine, she doesn't need coddling like Caleb." I froze, the sponge dripping suds onto the counter. Fine? I wasn't fine. I was invisible. A machine they expected to run without fuel. I slammed the sponge down, harder than I meant to, and something snapped inside me. Not despair, but defiance. I wasn't going to beg for their scraps anymore. I was going to take control. I went to my room, pulled out the notebook, and started writing with a fury I didn't know I had. Not just chores this time, but everything. Every slight, every sacrifice, every moment they'd erased me. September 8, cooked dinner, 3 hours. Father said Caleb's game was the highlight of the day. September 9, organized bills, 2 hours. Mother asked Caleb about his stressful day. I wrote until my hand cramped, pages filling with precise, deliberate entries. It wasn't enough to just record. I needed to understand what it all meant. So I started calculating, hours spent, tasks completed, money saved. I taught myself to track expenses, cross-referencing grocery receipts I'd kept in a drawer. I added up the cost of my labor. $10 an hour for cleaning, $15 for cooking, $20 for the budgeting I did to keep us afloat. By the end of that month, I realized I'd earned over $1,200 in unpaid work. They had no idea. That was the aha moment. When I saw the ledger wasn't just a diary of pain but a ledger of power. I wasn't just their servant, I was their foundation. Without me, the groceries wouldn't appear, the bills wouldn't be paid, the house wouldn't function. I started documenting more meticulously, buying a proper ledger with grid lines from the dollar store, hiding it in the shoebox under my bed. I recorded every detail. October 15, fixed washing machine belt, 2 hours, saved $100 repair cost. November 3, planned Thanksgiving menu, shopped, cooked, 6 hours. Caleb complained about no dessert. I even noted their words, their dismissals, like my mother's sigh when I asked for new shoes. "We spent enough on Caleb's cleats, Leah." Each entry was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would one day shield me, or crush them. The struggle wasn't just the work, it was the secrecy. I'd write in stolen moments, heart racing when I heard footsteps, shoving the ledger under my mattress if Caleb barged in. I couldn't let them know. They'd mock it, destroy it, or worse, use it to guilt me into staying their servant forever. But keeping it hidden made me stronger. I'd lie awake, replaying their words, their indifference, and instead of crying, I'd plan. I researched online, late at night on the school library's computer, learning about labor laws, household economics, even psychology, how families like mine thrived on scapegoats. I wasn't just surviving, I was arming myself. By last night, the ledger was a masterpiece of quiet rage. Hundreds of pages, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of dollars in labor they'd never paid for. I flipped through it, my finger tracing the latest entry. July 22, cleaned house for family meeting, 4 hours. Father demanded I do Caleb's chores. I closed it, my breath steady, and placed it back in the shoebox. This wasn't just a record anymore, it was a weapon, one I'd wield not with screams or tears but with the cold precision they'd never expect. They thought I was nothing, but I'd built something undeniable. As I sat there, the house silent except for the hum of the fridge I'd fixed last month, I knew the ledger wasn't just my past. It was my ticket out. I stood, my bare feet cold on the floor, and looked at the door. Last night's meeting was still raw, my cheeks still stinging from my father's hand, but the ledger had shown me the truth. They needed me more than I needed them. I wasn't running away in defeat. I was walking away in victory. I tucked the shoebox under my arm, my resolve hardening. They'd see it soon enough. Not me, but the hole I'd leave behind. And when they did, they'd finally understand what they'd lost. The air in my room felt heavier now. The shoebox tucked back under my bed, its presence like a heartbeat I could feel through the floor. It was the evening of the family meeting, hours before everything would change, and I stood at my cracked mirror, staring at the girl who'd been invisible for too long. My reflection showed tired eyes, a faint bruise blooming on my cheek from last week's lesson when I'd dared to ask for a night off. Tonight wasn't just another dinner or another demand. It was the edge of a cliff, and I knew I was about to jump. My father had called this meeting to set things straight, which meant more rules, more chores, more ways to keep me under his thumb. I smoothed my worn sweater, my fingers lingering on a frayed thread, and braced myself for what was coming. Downstairs, the house smelled of the roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing, the oven timer still ticking in my head. I'd chopped vegetables, seasoned the meat, and scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, all while Caleb played video games and my mother scrolled her phone. My father had barked at me to make it quick when he got home, his boots tracking mud I'd have to clean later. I moved through the kitchen now, setting the table with the precision of someone who knew every fork's place by heart. The plates were chipped, the napkins folded just so, the kind of details they never noticed but would complain about if I missed. I caught my mother's eye as I set down her glass. She looked away, her fingers twitching like she wanted to say something but wouldn't. Caleb slouched in, tossing his phone on the table. "Smells decent for once," he said, not looking at me. I bit the inside of my cheek, adding his words to the ledger in my mind. July 23. Cooked dinner, 3 hours. Caleb's backhanded compliment. My father's heavy footsteps announced his arrival, the air shifting as he filled the doorway. He didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room like a general inspecting troops. "Leah," he said, his voice low, "Caleb's got a big game tomorrow. You're doing his laundry tonight." It wasn't a question. I set the serving spoon down, my hand steady despite the fire in my chest. "I have homework," I said, my voice quieter than I felt. His eyes narrowed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You'll do it," he said. "Family comes first." Family. The word tasted like ash. I glanced at my mother, hoping for a flicker of support, but she was studying the tablecloth, her hands knotted in her lap. Caleb smirked, leaning back in his chair, already knowing he'd won. I could have said yes. I could have nodded, gone upstairs, and added another entry to the ledger. July 23, did Caleb's laundry, 2 hours. But something in me snapped, not loud, not wild, but cold and sharp like a blade sliding free. "No," I said, the words small but solid like a stone dropped in still water. The room froze. My father's face darkened, his hands dropping to his sides, my mother's head jerked up, her eyes wide. Caleb's smirk vanished, replaced by a confused scowl. "What did you say?" my father asked, stepping closer. I stood my ground, my heart hammering but my voice steady. "I said no, I'm not doing his chores anymore." The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the floor under my father's weight as he closed the distance. "You think you get to decide?" he said, his voice a low growl. Before I could answer, his hand shot out, striking my cheek with a crack that echoed in my skull. Pain bloomed, hot and sharp, but I didn't flinch, I didn't cry. I just looked at him, then at my mother, who'd turned her face away again, and Caleb, who looked almost scared now. The ledger flashed in my mind, years of entries, years of me carrying them. They thought this would break me, but it didn't. It clarified everything. I turned, my cheek throbbing, and walked to the sink, picking up a dish as if nothing had happened. My father muttered something about learning my place, and sat down, the meeting starting like I hadn't just defied him. But inside, I was done. I saw it clearly now. They weren't my family. They were my jailers, and I wasn't staying. As I moved through the motions, serving the food, clearing plates, listening to their demands, I was already planning the ledger, the shoebox, the quiet exit I'd make tonight. They'd pushed me too far, and I was ready to let their world crumble without me. I rinsed a plate, my hands steady, my mind racing. The meeting droned on, but I was already halfway out the door. The sting on my cheek pulsed as I stood at the sink, the hot water scalding my hands, but I didn't flinch. The family meeting was in full swing behind me, the table groaning under the weight of my father's voice, laying out his rules like commandments. My refusal to do Caleb's chores hung in the air, a crack in the foundation they didn't yet see. I scrubbed a plate, my movements mechanical, but my mind was sharp, cataloging every word, every glance, every slight. The ledger in my room felt like it was burning a hole through the floorboards, its pages screaming the truth they ignored. Tonight, I'd endured their contempt for the last time. My father's voice cut through the clink of dishes. "Leah, sit down. You're not done here." I set the plate in the rack, water dripping from my fingers, and turned to face them. The kitchen light cast harsh shadows, making my father's face look carved from stone, his eyes locked on me like I was a problem to solve. My mother sat rigid, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. Caleb slouched, picking at the roast I'd made, his eyes flicking between me and our father, waiting for the show. I walked to the table, my bare feet silent on the linoleum, and sat, my hands resting in my lap, fingers curling into fists. "You think you can just say no?" My father started, leaning forward, his fork clattering against his plate. "This family works because everyone does their part." His part, I knew, was barking orders and signing his name on bills I'd already budgeted. I didn't answer, just met his gaze, my face blank despite the heat in my chest. He hated that, my silence. It was the one thing he couldn't control. "You're lazy," he went on, his voice rising. "You think you're above us? Above Caleb's game tomorrow? You think you get to slack off while he's out there making us proud?" Caleb smirked, shoving a piece of meat in his mouth, his eyes gleaming with smug victory. I glanced at my mother, hoping for something, anything, but she was staring at her plate, her lips pressed thin. "Leah," she said finally, her voice soft like she was afraid of breaking the air. "It's just laundry. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. The words hit harder than my father's hand. 5 years of washing Caleb's sweaty uniforms, ironing his shirts, folding his socks while he laughed with friends or played games, it wasn't a big deal to her. I swallowed, my throat tight, and said, "It's not just laundry, it's everything." My voice was quiet, but it landed like a stone. My father's eyes narrowed. Caleb stopped chewing, his fork hovering. "Everything?" my father mocked, leaning back, his chair creaking. "You got a roof over your head, food on the table. My table? You don't get to complain." He pointed at me, his finger like a gun. "You're ungrateful, Leah. Always have been." Ungrateful. The word burned, but not because it was true. It wasn't. It burned because it was their lie, the one they told themselves to justify using me. I thought of the ledger. July 23, cooked dinner 3 hours, budgeted groceries 1 hour, no one said thank you. I wanted to scream it, to shove the truth in their faces, but I didn't. Not yet. Caleb chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yeah, Leah. Chill. It's not like you're doing anything important." He grinned, like he'd landed a punch. My mother nodded slightly, her eyes still on her plate, as if agreeing was easier than thinking. I felt the weight of their words, their stares, piling on like the dishes I'd washed, the floors I'd scrubbed, the life I'd given up to keep theirs running. My hands tightened in my lap, nails digging into my palms. I could have argued, could have listed every chore, every sacrifice, but they wouldn't hear it. They never did. Instead, I stood, my chair scraping the floor. "I'm done," I said, not loud, not angry, just final. My father's face went red, his hand twitching like he might hit me again. "Sit down," he barked, but I didn't. I walked back to the sink, picked up another plate, and started washing, my back to them. The room was silent except for the splash of water, the clink of porcelain. They thought they'd won, that I'd caved, but they didn't see what I saw, the end. My cheek throbbed, my heart raced, but my hands were steady. The ledger waited upstairs, and with every scrub I was closer to using it. They'd pushed me to the edge, and I was ready to leap. The dishes were done, stacked neatly in the rack. The kitchen quiet, except for the drip of the faucet I'd fixed last month. The family meeting had ended, my father's voice still echoing in my head. His final words, "You'll learn your place, Leah," cutting deeper than his hand had. I stood at the sink, my hands dry and cracked, staring at the dark window that reflected my face, pale and bruised. My mother had retreated to her room, her silence louder than any words. Caleb was sprawled on the couch, his phone glowing, laughing at some meme, while the weight of my refusal hung like smoke in the air. I wasn't going back to the table. I wasn't going back to them. Right there, in that moment, I decided to walk away. Not tomorrow, not next week, but tonight. I moved quietly, my bare feet soft on the linoleum, and climbed the stairs to my room. The house creaked around me, familiar in its complaints, but it felt different now, like a cage I was about to leave. I closed my door, the click loud in the stillness, and sat on my bed, my heart steady, but my hands trembling with purpose. I reached under the bed frame, pulling out the shoebox, its edges worn from years of hiding. The ledger inside was my anchor, its pages a map of everything I'd given them. I didn't open it, not yet, I didn't need to. I knew every entry by heart. February 10, cleaned house 4 hours, Caleb left dishes in sink. May 5, budgeted rent 2 hours, father yelled about late cable bill. It was my life reduced to lines and numbers, but it was also my proof. They'd built their world on me, and I was done holding it up. I stood, moving with a calm I didn't know I had, and opened my closet. My backpack, faded and patched from middle school, hung on a hook. I pulled it down, the zipper sticking as I opened it. I didn't have much to take. Just the essentials. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush, the $87 I'd saved from odd jobs for neighbors. I folded each item carefully, my fingers steady, though my breath caught when I thought of what I was doing. Leaving. Not running, not escaping, leaving. There's a difference. Running is fear. Leaving is choice. I chose this. I chose me. I paused, my eyes falling on the small wooden box on my dresser, a gift from my grandma before she passed. Inside was her old necklace, a simple silver chain with a tiny star pendant. She'd given it to me when I was 10, whispering, "You're stronger than you know, Leah." I hadn't worn it in years, afraid my father would take it, but now I slipped it into my pocket, the metal cool against my fingers. It felt like a promise, a piece of someone who'd seen me when no one else did. I added it to my mental ledger. July 23 took Grandma's necklace, mine now. Downstairs, the TV blared, Caleb's laughter cutting through. My father's heavy footsteps moved to the living room, his voice grumbling about something I didn't care to hear. My mother's door stayed closed. They were so sure I'd stay, so sure I'd bend, that they didn't even notice me slipping away. I pulled the ledger from the shoebox, its weight familiar, and tucked it into my backpack. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was my story, my truth, my weapon. I wouldn't leave it behind, but I'd leave them something else. A copy, a condensed version I'd written last month when the idea first took root. 30 pages, listing every major task, every unpaid hour, every dollar I'd saved them. It was in the shoebox, ready to be their mirror when I was gone. I zipped the backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and looked around my room one last time. The bare walls, the thin mattress, the flickering bulb, they weren't mine anymore. I wasn't theirs anymore. My cheek still throbbed from my father's hand, but it didn't hurt, it fueled me. I opened my door, the house's sounds louder now, and moved down the stairs, my steps silent. I wasn't sneaking, I was choosing not to be seen. Not yet. The ledger's copy waited in the shoebox, and soon they'd find it. Soon, they'd see what they'd lost. But first I had to go. I took a breath, my hand on the front door, and felt the spark from the table flare into freedom. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound soft but final, like the last note of a song I'd never sing again. The night air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked grass, and the street was quiet except for the hum of a distant car. My backpack weighed on my shoulder, the ledger inside it a steady reminder of why I was here, standing on the porch I'd swept 1,000 times. I didn't look back at the house, its sagging shutters and chipped paint glowing faintly under the streetlight. I didn't need to. I knew every crack in its walls, every stain I'd scrubbed, every corner I'd made livable. But before I walked away, I had one last thing to do. A final act. Not of anger, but of truth. The shoebox in my hands held the copy of my ledger, and it was time to leave it behind. I stepped back inside, moving silently through the dark hallway to the kitchen. The TV blared from the living room, Caleb's laughter mixing with some game show my father was grumbling over. My mother's door stayed closed upstairs, her absence as loud as ever. The kitchen table sat where I'd left it, cluttered with the remnants of dinner. Plates I wouldn't wash, crumbs I wouldn't sweep. I set the shoebox in the center, its plain cardboard stark against the chipped wood. Inside was the condensed ledger, 30 pages of my life distilled into cold hard facts. March 12, cooked dinner, 3 hours, $45 value. June 5, fixed plumbing, 2 hours, $100 saved. July 23, cleaned house for meeting, 4 hours, no thanks. Every entry was a mirror, showing them what they'd taken for granted. I didn't write a note. The ledger spoke for itself. My fingers lingered on the box, my heart steady but my breath shallow. This wasn't revenge in the way they'd understand, no yelling, no broken dishes, no dramatic exit. It was colder, sharper, more precise. They'd wake up tomorrow and I'd be gone, but this box would stay, a quiet bomb that would detonate when they opened it. They'd see the hours, the dollars, the years I'd poured into their lives while they gave me nothing but bruises and orders. My father would rage, my mother would cry, and Caleb would scoff. But they'd feel it. The void I'd leave, the collapse of their fragile world. I'd carried them for too long, and now they'd have to stand on their own. I stepped back, my hands empty now, and felt a weight lift. The ledger's copy was their problem now. The original was mine, tucked safely in my backpack. I walked to the front door again, my steps lighter, and paused with my hand on the knob. For a second, I imagined them finding the box. My father's face twisting as he read, my mother's hands shaking, Caleb's smug grin fading. I didn't smile, but I felt something close to it, a quiet satisfaction deep in my chest. I'd spent years being invisible, but this box would make them see me, even if it was too late. Outside, the night stretched wide, the stars sharp above the sagging rooftops. I adjusted my backpack, the strap digging into my shoulder, and started walking. The street was familiar, cracked sidewalks I'd navigated with grocery bags, mailboxes I'd passed while running errands, but it felt different now, like I was seeing it for the first time. My cheek still throbbed from my father's hand, but it was just a dull ache, overshadowed by the clarity in my head. I wasn't running away, I was choosing to leave. The ledger had shown me my worth, not in their eyes but in mine. Every step took me further from their control, closer to something new. I didn't know where I'd sleep tonight, maybe with my friend Sarah, who'd offered her couch before, or maybe I'd find a cheap motel with my $87. But I wasn't scared. I'd fixed leaks, balanced budgets, kept a house running since I was 12. I could figure this out. As I turned the corner, the house disappearing behind me, I felt the necklace in my pocket. My grandma's star pendant cool against my fingers. "You're stronger than you know," she'd said. She was right. They thought they'd broken me, but they'd only made me unbreakable. The shoebox waited, and I walked on, free. The street stretched dark and quiet before me, the only sound my sneakers scuffing against the cracked sidewalk as I walked away from the house that had caged me for years. My backpack hung heavy, the ledger inside it like a heartbeat, steady and sure. The air was cool, the night alive with the chirp of crickets and the distant hum of a neighbor's AC unit. My cheek still burned from my father's hand, but the pain felt distant now, like a memory I was already leaving behind. I'd done it, walked out, left the shoebox with its damning ledger on the kitchen table and stepped into a world that was mine to shape. This wasn't just freedom, it was victory, cold and precise, the kind they'd never see coming. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but my feet moved with purpose, carrying me toward Sarah's house, 3 miles away. Sarah, my only real friend, had seen the bruises, heard the stories, and offered her couch more than once when I'd let slip how bad things were. I hadn't taken her up on it before. Too stubborn, too afraid of admitting I needed help. But tonight was different. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen cracked from when Caleb accidentally dropped it last year. My fingers hovered over Sarah's number, but I didn't call yet. I needed this walk, this moment alone, to feel the weight of what I'd done. The ledger's copy flashed in my mind, 30 pages of truth sitting in that shoebox like a landmine. I could picture my father opening it tomorrow, his face twisting as he read the hours, the dollars, the years I'd given them. April 7, cooked dinner, 3 hours, $45 value. Father said it wasn't good enough. June 19, cleaned garage, 5 hours. Caleb took credit for. My mother would cry, her hands fluttering like they always did when she didn't want to face something. Caleb would scoff, call it drama, but he'd feel it when the laundry piled up, when the fridge stayed empty, when the bills went unpaid. They'd built their lives on my labor, and I'd just pulled the foundation out from under them. I passed the corner store where I'd bought groceries every week. My $87 savings, a mix of change from those trips and cash from neighbors for odd jobs, mowing lawns, fixing faucets, things I'd learned out of necessity. My hands tightened on the backpack straps, the ledger inside a reminder of my strength. I wasn't just a servant, I was a survivor, a strategist. Every chore, every insult, had taught me how to plan, how to endure, how to outlast them. Leaving the ledger wasn't about hurting them, it was about showing them who I was. They'd ignored me, but they couldn't ignore the hole I'd leave. A car sped by, its headlights slicing through the dark, and I stepped onto the grass to avoid the glare. My mind wandered to tomorrow, to what they'd do when they realized I was gone. My father would yell, maybe break something. My mother would wring her hands, murmur about how I'd come back. Caleb would complain, loud and entitled, when he had to wash his own clothes. But they'd open the shoebox eventually, and the ledger would do what I couldn't, make them see. Not me, but the work, the hours, the life they'd taken for granted. I didn't need their apologies or their tears. I needed them to know they'd lost me. I stopped under a streetlight, my breath visible in the cool air, and pulled the necklace from my pocket. My grandma's star pendant caught the light, glinting like a promise. I slipped it around my neck, the chain cold against my skin, and felt her words again. "You're stronger than you know." I was. I'd walked away, not with screams or chaos, but with a plan. The ledger was my final word, my revenge, not loud but devastating. I tucked the pendant under my shirt next to my heart and kept walking. Sarah's house was closer now, its porch light a beacon in the dark. I was free, and for the first time I felt like I was enough. The porch light at Sarah's house glowed like a small sun, cutting through the night as I approached, my sneakers crunching on the gravel driveway. My backpack felt heavier now, the ledger inside it a quiet companion, but my steps were lighter than they'd been in years. The 3-mile walk had cleared my head, the cool air soothing the bruise on my cheek and the fire in my chest. I'd left the shoebox with its ledger copy on the kitchen table, my final gift to a family that never saw me. Now, standing at Sarah's door, I felt the difference between the cold neglect of my blood relatives and the warmth of someone who'd chosen me. This wasn't just a place to crash, it was a glimpse of what family could be. I knocked softly, my knuckles barely grazing the wood, half expecting to wake her. The door swung open almost immediately, Sarah standing there in a faded sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her eyes widened when she saw me, flicking to the bruise on my cheek, then to the backpack slung over my shoulder. "Leah," she said, her voice low but urgent. "You okay?" I nodded, my throat tight, not trusting myself to speak yet. She stepped aside, waving me in, and the warmth of her living room hit me like a hug, cinnamon candles, a sagging couch, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. It was messy, lived in, nothing like the sterile order I'd kept at home. I dropped my backpack by the door, the thud loud in the quiet. Sarah's mom, Miss Torres, appeared from the kitchen, a mug of tea in her hands. "Leah, honey," she said, her voice soft, her eyes catching the bruise without staring. "You're staying here tonight, yeah?" It wasn't a question that needed an answer. She set the mug down and pulled a blanket from the couch, tossing it over my shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. I clutched it, my fingers digging into the soft fabric, and felt something crack inside me. Not pain, but relief. Sarah sat across from me, her knees tucked under her, waiting. I didn't know where to start, so I just started. "I left," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Tonight. For good." Her eyes widened again, but she didn't interrupt. I told her about the family meeting, my father's hand, my refusal to do Caleb's chores. I told her about the ledger, the shoebox, the copy I'd left behind. My words came slow at first, then faster, spilling out like water from a broken dam. Sarah listened, her face shifting from shock to anger to something softer, something like pride. Miss Torres sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, not saying a word, but saying everything. "They didn't see me," I said, my voice catching, "but I made sure they will." I described the ledger's pages, the hours and dollars, the truth I'd left on that table. Sarah's jaw tightened when I mentioned my father's slap, but she smiled when I talked about walking out. "You're a badass, Leah," she said, her voice fierce. "They don't deserve you." Miss Torres squeezed my shoulder, her touch grounding me. "You're safe here," she said, "as long as you need." I nodded, my eyes burning, but I didn't cry. I'd spent enough tears on people who didn't care. We sat there, the three of us, the room quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional pop of the candle's wick. Sarah offered me popcorn, nudging the bowl toward me with a grin. I took a handful, the salt sharp on my tongue, and felt something shift. This was what family could be, not demands, not silence, but this. A warm room, a shared bowl, people who saw me. I thought of my mother's averted eyes, Caleb's smirks, my father's fists. Then I looked at Sarah, laughing as she flicked a popcorn kernel at me, and Miss Torres, who'd already started making up the couch for me. My real family wasn't the one I'd left behind. It was here, in this moment, with people who chose me back. I pulled the necklace from under my shirt, the star pendant catching the light. Sarah noticed, her eyes softening. "Your grandma's?" she asked. I nodded, my fingers tracing the star. "She'd be proud," Sarah said, and I believed her. The ledger had set me free, but this warmth, this belonging, was what would keep me going. I wasn't alone anymore. The morning light filtered through Sarah's living room curtains, soft and golden, painting stripes across the couch where I'd slept. The blanket Miss Torres gave me was still wrapped around my shoulders, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold knot in my stomach. My phone, tucked in my backpack, had buzzed twice since I woke. Texts from my mother probably, or maybe Caleb complaining about something I wasn't there to fix. I didn't check. I didn't want to hear their voices. Not yet, maybe not ever. Last night, I'd left the shoebox with the ledger's copy on the kitchen table, and by now, they'd likely found it. The thought didn't make me smile, but it steadied me. Today was about setting boundaries, building a fortress around the life I was starting to claim. Sarah was in the kitchen, clattering dishes as she made coffee, her voice carrying over the sizzle of eggs. "Leah, you want bacon?" she called, like it was just another morning. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and stood, folding the blanket with care. My backpack sat by the door, the ledger inside it a quiet anchor. I'd slept with it under the couch, close enough to touch, like it might vanish if I let it out of reach. Miss Torres was already at work, but she'd left a note on the coffee table. "Leah, food in the fridge, stay as long as you need, M." I traced the words, my chest tight with gratitude. This was what it felt like to be seen. My phone buzzed again, insistent, and I finally pulled it out. 3 texts from my mother. "Where are you?" "Leah, come home. We need to talk." No apologies, no questions about if I was okay, just demands, as always. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I didn't type. Instead, I opened a new message to Sarah, who was still in the kitchen, and typed, "Thanks for everything. I'm okay." I hit send, then turned my phone off. That was my first boundary. No more answering their calls, no more jumping when they snapped their fingers. Sarah plopped a plate of eggs and bacon in front of me as I sat at the kitchen counter, her grin wide. "You look like you're plotting something," she said, sliding me a mug of coffee. I shrugged, the corner of my mouth twitching. "Just figuring out what's next." She leaned on the counter, her eyes searching mine. "They're gonna try to pull you back, you know. Your dad especially." I nodded, taking a sip of coffee, its bitterness grounding me. "Let them try," I said, my voice low but firm. Sarah's grin widened, like she was proud of the steel in my tone. I thought about the ledger's copy sitting in that shoebox. By now, my father might have opened it, his face red as he read the numbers. July 10, cleaned house, 4 hours, $40 value. June 15, budgeted utilities, 2 hours, $30 value. My mother might be crying, her hands fluttering as she realized the groceries wouldn't magically appear anymore. Caleb would be whining, his laundry piling up, his entitlement useless without me. They'd try to reach me, maybe beg, maybe threaten, but I wasn't going back. I'd spent years carrying their world. Now they'd feel its weight. I pulled the necklace from under my shirt, the star pendant cool against my fingers. "I need to find a job," I said, more to myself than Sarah. "Something real, something mine." She nodded, grabbing her phone. "I know a guy at the diner downtown. They're hiring, and you're basically a pro at running a house, so serving tables? Easy." I laughed, the sound surprising me, light and free. She was right. I'd managed budgets, cooked meals, fixed appliances. A diner would be nothing. As we ate, I mapped out my boundaries in my head. No contact unless they apologized and meant it. No doing their work, no fixing their messes. I'd stay with Sarah until I could afford a place, maybe with my $87 and whatever I earned. I'd keep the ledger, not as a weapon now, but as a reminder of my worth. My family would feel my absence, and that was enough. I wasn't here to punish them anymore. I was here to build something new. I took a bite of bacon, its salt sharp and real, and felt my fortress rising, solid, mine, unbreakable. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I wiped down a sticky table, the rag in my hand smelling faintly of bleach. It had been 2 weeks since I'd walked out of my family's house, leaving the shoebox and its ledger copy behind, and I was already carving out a new life. Sarah's friend at the diner had hired me on the spot, said my ability to balance a budget and keep a house running made me a no-brainer for waitressing. The job was grueling, my feet aching after 10-hour shifts, but every tip I stuffed into my apron felt like a brick in the foundation of my new world. I wasn't just surviving, I was reclaiming my strength, turning the skills I'd honed as an unseen servant into something that was mine alone. The diner was busy tonight, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation filling the air. I moved fast, balancing trays of burgers and milkshakes, my hands steady from years of juggling chores. A regular, an older man named Mr. Ellis, waved me over, his eyes crinkling as he slid a $5 tip under his coffee mug. "You're a hard worker, Leah," he said, his voice kind. I smiled, tucking the bill into my apron, and felt a warmth I hadn't known at home. Here my work was seen, valued, not erased. I added it to my mental ledger, not the old one, but a new one I was building in my head. August 6, worked double shift, $42 in tips. Mr. Ellis said I'm doing great. My phone stayed off most days, but Sarah had convinced me to check it once, just to see what my family was doing. A week ago, I'd turned it on to find a string of texts, my mother's pleas, "Leah, please come home," and my father's demands, "You're being selfish." Caleb's were the worst, a mix of whining and insults. "Who's gonna do my laundry now? You're so dramatic." I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the messages, my thumb steady on the screen. The ledger's copy had done its work. I'd heard from a neighbor that my father had raged when he found it, throwing the shoebox against the wall, while my mother sat silent, the pages trembling in her hands. Caleb had tried to laugh it off, but he'd been late to practice without clean uniforms. Their house was unraveling, just as I'd known it would. I didn't need their chaos anymore. At the diner I was learning who I could be. My manager, Tina, had already started teaching me to handle inventory, trusting me with numbers because I'd mentioned balancing my family's budget. "You've got a head for this," she'd said, handing me a clipboard. I took it, my chest swelling with something like pride. I wasn't just a servant here. I was someone with skills, someone who mattered. I started saving my tips in a jar at Sarah's, the coins clinking as they added up. $120 so far, enough to start dreaming about a room of my own. At night, when the diner closed, I'd sit on Sarah's couch, the star pendant around my neck glinting under the lamp. I'd think about my grandma, her words echoing, "You're stronger than you know." I was proving her right. Every shift, every tip, every order I got right was a piece of my legacy, not theirs. I wasn't erasing my past, I was rewriting it, taking the strength they'd forced me to build, and using it to create something better. My family's name, Chambers, didn't belong to my father's anger, or Caleb's entitlement anymore. It was mine, tied to the girl who'd walked away and kept going. As I swept the diner floor at closing, the broom steady in my hands, I felt solid, grounded. The ledger was still in my backpack, a reminder of where I'd come from, but it wasn't my story anymore. I was writing a new one, line by line, shift by shift. I locked the diner's door, the night air cool against my skin, and walked toward Sarah's, my steps sure. I wasn't just reclaiming my strength, I was reclaiming myself. The jar of tips on Sarah's kitchen counter glinted under the morning light, its coins and crumpled bills a quiet testament to the life I was building. 3 weeks had passed since I'd left the shoebox on my family's table, its ledger copy unraveling their world while I pieced together mine. I sat on the couch, my sneakers still damp from last night's diner shift, and traced the star pendant around my neck, its edges worn smooth from my touch. The diner had become my proving ground. Each tray I balanced, each order I nailed, a step towards something solid. But today, as I sipped coffee Sarah had left brewing, I wasn't thinking about work or my family's collapse. I was thinking about me, about the peace settling in my chest, a feeling so new it almost scared me. I was starting to understand my worth, not because of what I did for others, but because of who I was. Last night, after closing the diner, I'd sat in the empty parking lot, the air thick with summer heat, and pulled out the original ledger from my backpack. Its pages were creased, the ink smudged in places, but it wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a map. March 15, cook dinner, 3 hours, $45 value. June 2, fix sink, 2 hours, $100 saved. Each entry was a scar, but also a badge, proof I'd survived. I didn't hate my family for it anymore, I didn't need to. The ledger had done its job, showing them what they'd lost, but it had also shown me what I'd gained. Every chore, every sacrifice had made me resilient, resourceful, unbreakable. I closed it, tucking it back into my bag, and looked at the stars above the diner's neon sign. For the first time, I didn't feel small. Sarah's couch had become my home, her laughter and Miss Torres's quiet kindness my anchor, but I wasn't staying forever. I'd saved $200 now. Enough to start looking for a room to rent, maybe near the diner. Tina, my manager, had hinted at a promotion, saying my knack for numbers could make me a shift lead. The idea lit something in me, not just pride but possibility. I'd spent years keeping a house running, now I was learning to run my own life. My phone stayed mostly off, but Sarah had passed on a rumor from a neighbor. My family's house was a mess, bills unpaid, dishes piling up. Caleb had missed a game, too lazy to wash his uniform. My mother had called Sarah once asking where I was, but I'd told Sarah to say I was fine and leave it at that. They didn't get to pull me back. I stood, stretching, and walked to the jar, dropping in last night's tips. $18, mostly ones and quarters. Each coin felt like a choice, a step toward a future I defined. I thought about my grandma, her star pendant warm against my skin. She'd seen my strength before I did, and now I was living it. I didn't need my family's validation, their apologies, or their chaos. My worth wasn't in their eyes, it was in mine, in the way I showed up, in the life I was building. I grabbed my apron, ready for another shift, and felt a quiet peace settle over me. I was enough. Have you ever had to walk away from something that held you back, to find out who you really are? That's what this journey was for me, leaving behind a family that didn't see me, and finding peace in my own strength. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. You don't need anyone's permission to be enough. You already are. Keep shining, keep choosing yourself, and let's build our own paths together.